Hello there, sword friends. This is going to be a chat/review of this sword from David DelaGardelle, and hopefully I'm saying the man's name correctly. If you're unfamiliar with his work, please allow me to share it with you. You can now find David's work under Cedarlore Forge is where you can find him operating now. That's his shop and the name he operates under. And the works there are an order of magnitude better than this sword, because this sword was made by Mad Dwarf Workshop, and not that that's necessarily bad. It was just at a time where he was much less competent as a smith. This sword admittedly was made when he was in high school and he was still figuring things out, so there's some quirks to it still. It's definitely better than anything I ever made in high school. It has a lot of cool characteristics. I'm going to talk about this sword, though. It should be noted that this was from the days of the Mad Dwarf Workshop, and as cool and awesome as it is, his work is significantly better. As smiths do tend to evolve and ideally get better, Dave definitely falls into both of those categories. His art style is a little bit more refined now, and his aptitude as a smith is, at least from the pictures that I've seen, much better than it was when he made this sword. Though this sword is nothing to scoff at. It's a pretty awesome piece, and I am happy to be holding it in my hand and talking to you about it right now. If I could sum up my personal interpretation of the man's art, he does a good job of balancing a functional weapon with fantasy, kind of Tolkien-inspired fantasy styles and artistry of his own kind of thought process. So art and fantasy and function is a tough trifecta to balance, and I think he does it really, really well based on some of the photos that I've seen. How a sword should look in one aspect, I think he nailed the shit out of that, but two, how it should feel in the hand, this lacks a little bit, and I'll talk on that later. But he has now his own sense of artistry and style, and this doesn't necessarily represent what that is anymore, which I suppose brings me to the caveat section, the disclaimer section of this video, which I should get out of the way. One, I'm not affiliated with Cedarlore Forge Works or Mad Dwarf Forge Works or any other type of forge works. I just bought this sword and I thought it was cool, so I'd talk about it. And two, I bought it secondhand, which means, again, it's not representative of what you would buy today. It's been used, it's been modified, and there are some things that you need to consider that aren't what you really representative of what you would get from the man if you were to order something from David today. Lastly, I'm not an expert in historic European martial arts. I don't practice them, I don't study them. I think they're all sorts of cool, but I just haven't got off my fat ass to actually do any of them. So I don't know what the hell I'm talking about as it relates to how to move this sumbitch around, and you should keep that in mind as I ramble on about this sword that I don't really know what I'm talking about. So hopefully, if you don't want to hear me talk, I can't necessarily blame you. You can mute this video and just look at the pretty pictures, and hopefully that will help you decide if buying something from Cedarlore Forge Works, the current iteration of where you could find David's work now, is worth your hard-earned money. And with that, I will move on with the actual review. The first thing that I talk about is the pommel. And really, as I talk about the pommel, it makes sense to talk about the grip in terms of their overall aesthetic. And that is that they have this kind of rough file work, this kind of handmade roughness to them, which I would guess is artistic and intentional. They don't look made by conventional power tools because there's not any kind of discernible pattern to them. It looks like they're made, or that the texture has been put in by file work, and it gives it this sense to me that this blade is like this found heirloom, mythological type of meteorite, something, with a more rudimentary hilt on it that's been passed down over the years. I don't know, that's kind of the story I tell myself, but maybe that's just me looking into it. It has this really cool, very lavish, very pretty blade, and just a very rudimentary set of fittings on it. So that's kind of the appearance that I get from it. Now, in general, the pommel is evenly made. It appears to be hand textured rather than cast. It has some dimension to it and symmetry, which I admit is tough to pull off. There's lines in dimension that are more than just kind of what you see in this round circle with another circle in it. There's just a little bit more to it, and it's even and cool. The peen on it is a little rough, and if you hear this, you can kind of hear that I can get my fingernail in there, and I feel this roughness as I put my finger on top of it, actually. Without a glove, if I were swinging at pace, this might dig into my skin if for some reason my skin was on it. If I had a glove, it probably wouldn't be that big a deal. In any case, it's actually really it's good looking, honestly, but it has a rough texture to it, and that gives me the impression it could be done a little better, though the thing I'll note is that this appears to just be hammered on, and hammered peens, it's pretty easy to miss a stroke and really deform the actual pommel here, and this doesn't seem to be deformed. So tip of my hat there. It looks like you formed it on there. There's a little bit of a ledge. A lot of times these are sanded or filed over, and I don't exactly know why that wasn't done, but maybe it's part of the aesthetic in terms of the roughness. In any case, it's really not that big a deal. It's really well formed for hammer work, and it shows that you can actually hit a hammer, hit the nail on the head a little bit better than the average guy, because it doesn't appear that this pommel has been deformed. There's a couple misstrokes in there. It's not perfect, but it's overall pretty good. The grip is something that I should talk about as well, and that is that this has been redone. It's been customized, and it's not representative of David's work at all. So disregard the grip. Underneath here is the original grip, and what it's been wrapped with is Fred Lohman Tsunami Ito, which is something conventionally used on a Japanese style sword. I got a few on the wall with Tsunami Ito back there, and honestly, it fucking feels fantastic. I wish that more European style swords actually had this on here. It's misplaced and not pretty and not great. It mimics suede in its feel, and it's honestly a really big boon to this sword. It feels really good. The original owner actually complained to me that he said it felt a little rough, or rather too small in his hand. And I can kind of agree, though I do have giant sausage hands, that it feels really great in my hand. It's grippy without being tacky, and honestly it feels really good. It doesn't look great, but it feels really good. The guard, as I talked about, has this same kind of roughness that really matches the pommel. The thing I'll also note is that the lines on this guard are really clean and smooth. It's tough to make something with these gentle tapers that's even. This looks really rudimentary, and I can't say I'm honestly a fan of the overall appearance, but I do acknowledge that if you're hand grinding these things, it's a pain in the dick to make, and there's bevels and angles and things that make this really a testament to an even-handedness on a grinder, or somebody that has some skill in making things even, because it's tough to do. My criticism would be that the openness in the guard is not great. There are some open, you can spot basically a couple millimeters of openness around the crossguard where the blade meets the crossguard. I don't necessarily like that. It should be perfect. There shouldn't be really any gap in there. Historically, there might be, but if you're charging lots of money for a sword, it's nice to see them not in there. And since Albion has really stepped up the game, and you can very rarely find more than a millimeter or half a millimeter of gap around the entire blade, I'd like to see that on custom things, especially things that charge for embellishments aesthetically. In any case, that would be my one criticism. It's not bad. It doesn't hurt the sword. It's not unfunctional. It's not really that big a deal. And frankly, across the market of custom swords, most people have a pretty substantial gap in them. So I'm bitching about it. So there you go. That would be my one real criticism about the assembly. This could be cooler and better and neater and all sorts of other things in terms of the fit and finish, but that's an aesthetic, personal choice, and maybe the original buyer wanted this exact thing, or I don't know. But in any case, it's aesthetic. This is a little bit more tangible, as that could be better done. The blade, as I move on to the blade, this is just cool as hell. It has this really cool pattern in it. It's this very bold folding pattern, and I've looked all over the blade. There are no gaps, no open welds, no misses, nothing like that. And the flats on the blade are fantastic. Now the center ridge after the fuller kind of disappears a little bit. You can see it as I hold it thusly, but it kind of disappears as I look at it along the flats of the blade. But this almost looks like a Japanese style sword in its delivery of block sanding or flat clean planes, and it's extremely well done without being so crisp that it looks fake. A lot of times if European style swords have just very crisp, really hard edges and a super shimmery polish, they look fake and dumb, and it doesn't really go well with the aesthetic. This balances that really well. The edges and lines are very clean, and it's very flat and very well manufactured. I do have to tip my hat there. No open welds. I don't know exactly what metals this is made from. I think it's L6 plus something else, but hell if I really honestly know. In any case, it's very beautiful. My daughter calls it the fishbone. It looks cool as hell, and it stands out as this really elaborate, cool, magnificent looking blade with this really kind of rustic looking handle. I think it honestly balances well. Now the blade also comes as well with a scabbard of sorts. It's a wooden scabbard with some metal fittings on it. I'll include a picture there. You can kind of see it. It looks nice enough. It doesn't necessarily draw super well, but as a complete package, it's really quite nice. In terms of typology, I don't know what the hell this sword would be. It's an arming sword, obviously, but I don't know historically what this sword would be. I'll include measurements as well as the weapon dynamics computer so that you can see more tangibly, and maybe you can tell me what kind of typology it would be, if it does fit into a typology at all, and if it does, throw it in the commentary down below, because you'll probably know more about it than I will. In any case, dynamically speaking, I can show you the weapon dynamics computer, but tangibly how it feels great. And honestly, there's a really unique characteristic to this sword that I haven't felt in any other sword, and that is that it is a great training tool for edge alignment. And I'll elaborate here. Now, it doesn't really suit me for the battlefield. This sword does something that I wouldn't really want on a battlefield, but I do actually really like having in a sword. And so, dynamically speaking, basically as I move it around, it feels great. It has kind of a node right along the cutting plane up here, and as I move it, I feel very connected to that node, while simultaneously I feel like I could put the tip right where I want it to go. I don't feel disconnected from it. It's light, it's nimble, it's comfortable, but at the same time, in a swing, as I move it around actually at pace, it feels like this sword is turning, and if I don't have just the best edge alignment, which honestly it's not hard to, this ovoid grip allows me to index really, really well. I feel connected to the sword. It's not hard to index, but if I'm not really clean on my edge alignment, then the sword almost turns into the swing, and it just turns into a bat, and it's not great. It still cuts, even though it's not super sharp. It has a nice kind of ring to it, but it's not super sharp. It does cut well, but it definitely tells you as you're moving it around that your edge alignment is going to get worse, because this thing is going to almost slap with the flat of the blade is kind of what it feels like. That doesn't actually happen, and I'll show you the cutting thing, but in effect, as I move it around, if my edge alignment isn't good, it feels like this part of the blade is held together by thread. It's very sturdy, it held up with cutting, but it feels very thin, and as I throw the blade out there, if my edge alignment isn't good, it feels like the top portion of the blade is turning in to the cut, and that gives a very strange kind of wants to jump out of your hand sensation. However, if you throw the blade out there correctly and your edge alignment is good, it moves perfectly well. It gives you this tangible sensation that you're fucking up edge alignment and just need to do better. In the cut, it doesn't really perform worse. It actually cuts quite well for something that I would say isn't necessarily super sharp. It thrusts okay, though I do have problems actually penetrating with the thrust, but the tip isn't actually super sharp. In any case, the cut, it does really well. I feel connected to it. It's not hard to index. It's not hard to cut with. And as I do a bad cut, as I throw one out there and kind of let it kind of move around, you really see the blade wobble all over the place. It's very, very flexible. And that's the part that wouldn't be good in a battlefield scenario, in my opinion. It's probably made of a very resilient steel that's going to take impact well and probably bounce back, but I would want something a little bit more rigid on the battlefield. As I throw it out there, I won't want the blade to kind of rattle all over the place, or to have to really throw it out there and have the blade kind of make my poor edge alignment even more poor. As a training tool, fantastic. As a battlefield weapon, not so great. And that's, I suppose, the interesting bit there, because I'm never going to be on a battlefield with a sword, at least for God's sake, I hope not. It's a training tool, which is something I do swing around in my backyard. I do cut tatami mats. It does that job, and as a training tool, it's really much more beneficial to me in its current implementation than it would be if it were more sturdy and ready for a battlefield. It has more to teach me, more to tell me, and more to yell at me about in its current shape, and I find that actually really interesting. I don't think it was necessarily intentionally built that way. Maybe it was, but in any case, it's very helpful in terms of actually indexing the blade correctly, throwing it out there, and having good edge alignment. It's one of the most tactile and tangible sensations I've felt in a European-style sword, telling me like I'm not doing it right and to do my job better. So from that side of things, I think it's cool. From a battlefield weapon standpoint, it would not be my first choice. But as a collector standpoint, I'm never going to be on the battlefield. And I do want to cut better, and I do want to look like less of an asshole on YouTube, and I do want to cut mats better, and this is a very helpful tool to do that. And still very forgiving. And the cuts, you could see it wobbling all around, taking some pretty significant bends and stuff, but it's still straight as an arrow, very clean, very sharp, no edge deformation, no additional scratching that I can discern outside of what I got it with. And it's clean, it's not twisted, and so from that standpoint, it's very well manufactured. As a training tool, it's really, really great. Now the trick is, what does something like this cost? And honestly, I have no idea what this would cost you now. It was around $2,000 or $1,500 or something to that effect when I bought it on Swordform some time ago, and I thought I would share it with you. But if you were to buy something new like this, it wouldn't surprise me if it was over $2,000 or maybe closer to $4,000. I would venture a guess that it would probably be stiffer and more balanced in terms of the way that a sword typically would feel, more battlefield ready, if you will. But in any respect, I think it's a really awesome sword. I am super happy that I have it. It feels super, super fun in my hand. I really like it, and it gives me, honestly, some cool ideas. As much as I don't like the appearance of this Tsunami Ito and the way it was done on this sword, it feels fantastic, and it gives me some ideas for future projects with other European-style swords. I do have some random stuff to dick about with in the back there, and it gives me some thoughts around fun, cool, different ways to approach those ideas. And in a respect, this is a cool sword, and I have the utmost respect for David. He's done a great job in terms of walking the line between artistry, and the fact that I can clearly see that he has evolved as a smith. I wouldn't necessarily hesitate to buy his works if you find them interesting in appearance and want something that looks like the thing he's selling. In any respect, that's what I have for you. I hope you find it helpful, and as always, cheers and thanks for watching.